You know, history is just packed with some truly weird and unbelievable stories. But what if I told you that one of the most famous conflicts in medieval Italy, a war with almost 40,000 soldiers, was supposedly started over a bucket? Yeah, a wooden bucket. Let's dive in.
It's literally called the War of the Bucket. I mean, the name alone sounds like a joke, right? But this was a real war fought back in 1325 between the Italian city-states of Bologna and Modena. The question is, was it really, actually about a bucket?
And that's the big question, isn't it? It's such a fantastic story. You can see why it's been told for centuries. It's just so ridiculous. But is there any truth to it?
So, the popular myth, the one everyone knows, is super simple. A few Modenese soldiers sneak into Bologna, they grab a bucket from a public well, probably as a prank, and Bologna just completely loses it and declares an all-out war. It's the perfect tale of a petty argument getting way, way out of hand.
Well, like with so many great historical legends, that's not the whole story. Not even close. The bucket is definitely part of the story, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the cause. The real reason is, of course, a lot more complicated, and it's tied to a massive conflict that had been tearing Italy apart for ages.
To really get what's going on, we have to zoom out a bit. The real fight was between these two huge political factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. This was the actual rivalry that set the stage for all the drama with the bucket.
Okay, so to break it down simply, you can think of it as Team Pope versus Team Emperor. The Guelphs, and that includes our city of Bologna, they were loyal to the Pope. The Ghibellines, which includes Modena, backed the Holy Roman Emperor. And this wasn't just, a political preference. This was a deep, bitter rivalry that fueled constant fighting over who controlled what.
And this was not a new beef. This conflict had been raging for something like 300 years. I mean, decades before our bucket story even starts. Back in 1296, Guelph Bologna had already attacked and seized territory from Ghibelline Modena. So the War of the Bucket in 1325, it wasn't some random event. It was just another bloody chapter in a very, very long book.
So if it wasn't the bucket, what was the actual tipping point? Well, by 1325, all the nonstop border disputes and political hatred had brought tensions to a serious boiling point. It just needed one last shove to go over the edge.
And in the months right before the war, things got bad fast. In July, Bolognese forces raided Modena's farmland. Then in August, they came back and just tore up the countryside for 2 solid weeks. So Modena finally had enough. In September, they hit back, and they hit back hard. They captured a super important Bolognese castle called Montevideo.
And that is the key. The seizure of a strategic military fortress, a huge blow to Bologna's power and security, that was the real cause of the war. This was an act of aggression they just couldn't ignore. The bucket was a sideshow, Montevideo was the main event.
Furious about losing their castle, Bologna put together a massive army and marched on Modena. This all led to the one and only major battle of the war, the Battle of Zappolino. And what happened there was something nobody saw coming.
So, on one side, you've got Bologna. They bring an absolutely enormous force to the field, 32,000 men, an army that was meant to just steamroll Modena, no problem.
And on the other side, Modena. They could only scrape together 7,000 soldiers to defend their home. The odds were just ridiculously stacked against them.
I mean, just look at that. Outnumbered more than 4 to 1. On paper, this shouldn't have even been a fight. It should have been a complete and total annihilation.
But that is not what happened. In a jaw-dropping upset, the 7,000 guys from Modena completely routed Bologna's huge army of 32,000. They sent the invaders running all the way back to their own city. It was a humiliating, decisive defeat for the bigger army.
Now, the battle itself was short, but it was incredibly bloody. In just a couple of hours of fighting, about 2,000 men were killed. A brutal reminder of the very real human cost behind all this political squabbling.
Okay, so where does the bucket finally come into play? Well, after chasing the defeated Bolognese army all the way back to their city gates, the triumphant Modenese soldiers decided, you know what, let's add a little insult to injury here. And there it is. The bucket wasn't the cause of the war, it was a trophy from the war. It was a symbol of their unbelievable victory, scooped up from a well right outside Bologna's walls as a final taunt. It was pretty much the ultimate medieval in-your-face.
The Modenese were so proud of this thing, they took it home and put it on display in the bell tower of their main cathedral. And it stayed there for centuries as a constant reminder of that time they totally crushed their rivals. And the story just got so famous, it was immortalized in art and culture. There's a famous 17th century satirical poem called The Stolen Bucket that really cemented the myth. It even inspired an opera. And you can kind of see why the myth stuck, right? A simple, petty fight over a bucket is a much easier and funnier story to tell than a centuries-long political struggle. The legend was just better than the truth.
So, in the end, the War of the Bucket wasn't really about a bucket at all. But the story? It was just too good to let the boring facts get in the way. It really shows you how sometimes the symbol of a victory can become way more famous than the victory itself. It makes you wonder, what other parts of history do we remember for the trophy and not for the actual fight?